Well, before we get into the Red-ruffed Fruitcrow, Shannon, do you want to talk a little bit about what you did this past week? Because it was super cool and super bold, and I think deserves some praise.
Well, you guys were there to witness my dumbfoundedness, I suppose. Um, I was invited, and I still don't know why, to as a scientist to go to something that a professor at Loyola has created called Uncontrolled Variables. And it's a comedy show that has been going on for, I guess, 4 years, starting in COVID. And this was their 4th-year anniversary, and they did, the whole session was on birds. And it was by far the weirdest thing I have ever done in my very old life. And so they had comedians that were assigned to people. So I did it, and so did our students, Louise and Jacob, both of whom have appeared on this podcast. And they have way more experience with comedy clubs than I do, which is like basically almost no experience with comedy clubs. So I didn't really know what to expect, but they asked for 5 slides from a scientific presentation that you've given. And they were going to have comedians, and the comedians that were assigned to us were going to do a comedy bit based on our slides, like blind. The guys had never seen these slides before. And,
Clearly.
Yeah. And I deliberately left a few words in my slides because I wanted to see what would happen, and I wasn't prepared for what actually happened. So they did a few minutes of a bit on the slides, and then you get up as a scientist and give a 5 to 10 minute presentation based on those slides about research. And I talked about kingfishers and kingfisher brains and the tree of life for kingfishers, kingfisher beaks.
And you set the record straight.
Did I, though? They set the record straight for me, which is I looked at my slides in a way I've never done before, and it was really like having an out-of-body experience.
You did set it straight. You captured the whole room, Shannon. When you got up there, you held everyone's attention. You were funny, too. I felt like it was, there were probably over 100 people there in the room. Like, I can't imagine being in your shoes and going up there and seeing all those people and keeping it together.
Seriously.
That was really fun.
Yeah, I've given a lot of talks in my career, right? A lot of talks. And the very first one I gave was memorable at a national meeting because I felt a true flight or fight reaction happen, which is that I looked out at the audience and all of the blood drains from my extremities to go to your internal organs. I couldn't feel my hands or feet. I couldn't feel my lips. I just didn't think I was going to be able to do it. And that kind of happened again on Wednesday night, that I could feel the same thing looking out at the audience. And normally I don't think too much whether about people I don't know think I'm stupid. I care more about whether people I know and care about think I'm stupid. But I looked out at that audience. I'm like, oh my God, I'm at a comedy thing. What the heck am I doing? I don't know anything about comedy, and I'm not funny. And nothing I'm talking about brain injuries and CTE. It's not funny. And all of that kind of washed over me. And I barely have any memory of what I talked about. But they also had this statistician guy who's a professor also come on, and his goal was to talk about bird strikes on planes, and he was truly funny. And I thought the comedians were hilarious. There was a woman who talked at the end. There was always a quiz thing, I guess, at the end of this. And so what they did at the end of the one on birds was they gave one of the comedians AirPods, and she put them in her ears. They played bird songs to her, and she had to describe the bird songs or imitate them in a way that the ornithologists could figure out what she was talking about. And oh my God, she was hilarious. And so brave. There's no way I would have done that. But it was very clever and very fun, and it's good to get outside of your comfort zone sometimes.
And,
you did that.
And science, for all the gloom and doom and blood and gore, can be pretty funny. I thought it was a great venue and format to do that.
It was very topical because there were jokes about penguins and tariffs, which completely cracked me up. So
It was such a good turnout too. We couldn't believe, like, we had never heard of it until you told us about it, Shannon, and it seemed to have a big following because we were trying to figure out how many people were there just to learn about birds versus how many people were regulars there. And I mean, I have a feeling it's a lot of regulars that are returning every month. So
it's been really popular. I think the organizers said there were around 200 people there.
200. Wow.
So
that's awesome.
I mean, every seat was filled. You guys were sitting towards the front, but the back had kind of almost stadium seating, and it was completely filled, including along the sides, which I tried not to look at when I looked up because the... Yeah.
See, the one reason I could tell you weren't a comedian was because the actual comedians are always actually looking out over the crowd and going, oh, only 2 or 3 of you laughed at that.
Yeah.
Like that's the difference I noted.
Well, I'll say, Shannon, you read the room really well somehow. Like, I feel like your timing was really good. Your delivery, like when there was like pause from the audience or any feedback, you like delivered right at the right timing. So It felt like you were up there talking with the comedians, and
yeah,
I mean, you did really good.
With babble, you mean?
No.
Oh my God.
Awesome.
And it was funny. We were looking on the wall before we went in, and they had all these, like, there's been a lot of people from like Saturday Night Live that have performed there. So Shannon, you're in the likes of some
good company.
Yeah, good company of some high profile comedians.
They're going to have you, a kingfisher, and the bullet train up there somewhere in one of those photos one of these days.
Somehow, I doubt it unless I bought the theater and did that. I don't know. It was good. It's good to tell people science stories outside of normal venues. John and I do this quite frequently, right? And it's really good. If you're in my position and you can't talk to people about what you do, you shouldn't be in my position, because the public funds our research, and the public enables us to do our research.
They used to.
Well, they used to, and that has an obligation to it. In my mind, it has an obligation to be able to communicate clearly and on someone's level about what you do, why you do it, and why you care. I mean, hopefully it's clear to most people that we really care about science. We really care about museums. We care about people learning about birds with the ultimate goal of, advancing knowledge. We have the best jobs in the world, and that's why this podcast, it touches on that in a really interesting way. It just kind of reminds you that you get to learn everything. You get to learn new things every day. And we get paid to do that. Not that much, but we get paid.
Well, thanks for inviting us, because we thought it was awesome.
I couldn't believe you went. What on earth were you thinking?
It was so much fun.
Yeah, we'd do it every month if you were going every month, Shannon. It was a blast.
Nope.
All right. Well, red-ruffed fruitcrow.
Yeah. So for everyone following along at home, so we did our Feather Thief mini-series a few episodes back, and we were going to follow up on some of the birds from the Feather Thief, and I think the red-ruffed fruitcrow is probably mentioned maybe the most in that book, so we thought it'd be a good bird to do an episode on.
Yeah, and I'm interested in your thoughts on choosing this bird and what you were able to find out about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not a lot.
Not much, yeah.
It's funny, when we I don't know, John, when we were emailing back and forth, you were saying the 2 birds we have coming up, one there's a ton of research on and a ton of information on, and one not so much. And I'm guessing this is the not so much one.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the crazy things about the sort of center role that it played in the Feather Thief is absolutely in juxtaposition to what's known about that bird. And there are a lot of birds out there that are like this, where they're not particularly small. This is a member of the Cotingidae, which is this big family of South American fruit-eating birds that have all kinds of crazy behavioral attributes. But even though these birds are big, it has a big geographic range. I think it's worth talking about that, because that range, even though it's really big geographically, is incredibly fragmented in the mountains across South America, to the point that there are these different subspecies that Kirk Johnson was actually talking about in The Feather Thief as being among the specimens that were stolen was actually geographic variation in this large bird. And, most of the information in a lot of ways of red-ruffed fruitcrow comes from specimens.
Yeah, well, as a reflection of how little is known about it, we only have 22 in our collections. It's not very many for a South American bird in particular, where we have really excellent collections. But we do have 5 subspecies. So we have representatives of all 5 of the subspecies, although I defy anybody to actually diagnose these subspecies for real.
There's some color differences in the throat color. That's what it, but the other thing that people, one of the things about subspecies too is that when you have a big fragmented range like this, over time, people are often going to look at the different populations and say, oh, I think I can see some of these differences. So Shannon's right. A lot of times they're really small.
And the range is really pretty spaced out across South America, right?
Yeah, it's like a ring around South America, right, where the montane regions are. So if you look at the montane regions, you'll see a ring of the montane regions that it mimics the ring, or the species mimic the ring of the mountain ranges.
And so the evolutionary biologist in me wants to know, how did that evolve? And it's so the Cotingas are, as I said, are a really diverse group. They're an old group, so they've been in South America for a long time, and a bunch of the species in this family have super odd, limited ranges. And in spite of that, one of the things that you can read about is that they'll say, well, they're rare, they're not very common within that range, and yet we don't think they're a species of conservation concern. And that's in part because they're living in montane areas that, for the most part, are actually more intact than a lot of other habitats on the slopes or down in the lowlands of these areas. But the word fruitcrow also fascinates me because, we've talked a little bit about scientific names and common names, and fruitcrow is applied to a whole handful of birds in this genus, or in this family. And they're all placed in different genera because they're the size of crows and they have big bills like crows, but they're all different looking enough that they've been put in different genera by the taxonomists over time.
I certainly tell people to go and look at pictures of Cotingas because they will absolutely blow your mind. And there's 65 species. They're in 24 genera. So that gives you something of a flavor of the distinctiveness. There's so many ones that are completely unique that they're not placed in the same genus as any of the other species. And so that's a reflection of just their diversity of behaviors, plumages. And I love that there's so many that have really fun names, like Lovely Cotinga, Pomodoro Cotinga. So,
Screaming Piha.
Screaming Piha. Umbrella Bird.
Oh, cool.
Plant Cutters.
That one.
Cock of the Rock.
Cock of the Rock.
Oh, Cock of the Rock is
a
a
Cotinga
too.
Oh.
It's a Cotinga, which came up in the comedian, the
Yeah.
comedy show.
That was his big punchline.
Yeah.
Yes.
That
So
was
Cotingas
an easy
are-
one, though. It doesn't take much comedic power to make that funny.
We saw a Cock of the Rock at the Brookfield Zoo not that long ago.
It was awesome. Yeah.
So Cotingas are not crows, right? So are these fruit crows are not actually any relation to a crow, or it's not a...
Well, they're
No, not at
songbirds.
all.
Okay.
They're
Well,
songbirds like crows are, but they're not. They're not in the same branch of the tree of life within songbirds that crows are in. So crows are more closely related to birds of paradise. Even though birds of paradise and Cotingas share a lot of similar kinds of behaviors and similar kinds of elaborated plumages, and they do that independently. They don't do that because they're related to each other.
What Shannon's talking about there is this lekking behavior where the males get together and form group displays where the females come in and choose males. And so these are lekking birds, and both birds of paradise and cotingas have these sexually selected ornamentations in some of the species that are almost certainly the result of female choice, leading to some really neat evolutionary novelties.
And one of the cotingas, yellow-billed cotinga, actually kind of cultivates the forest it does its lecking in by where it poops out seeds. And the forest that gets cultivated from the seeds that are dropped is the location for the lek, which is neat, right? It's like a gardener tending their garden to make it really pretty from that species perspective, right? So I don't know if I don't know if any other birds do that. Do they, Joe?
I wonder how well studied it is, because it seems like it's the kind of thing that could absolutely happen. I mean, there's caching behavior in jays and things, which isn't related to the breeding biology, but they're definitely improving their habitat around them by moving these seeds long distances that then germinate and spread some of the plants that they really like to eat.
Certainly fruit eating and lecking behaviors are fairly commonly paired together. So a lot of the lecking birds are also fruit eating, but I don't know if cultivating your own garden is just, I really like that kind of idea.
So they actually wait for the plants to grow then? So there's that much, like, they plant everything and then go back once it's grown, and that's where they do the lecking?
Well, they probably stay there. They probably find the right spot. Maybe it has a few plants that are right for it, and then it, drops some more, and then probably plucks out plants it doesn't like.
I wonder how much of that
it has the right characteristics. I don't really know.
I think it would be interesting to look into the sort of evolutionary aspect of that. So how many generations, and a bird like red-ruffed fruitcrow is clearly got some major habitat constraints or things that it's looking for, and you could imagine that that's something that's evolved over the 10 to 15 million years that these birds have been around, probably.
I was wondering, going back to the feather thief, so we watched some videos of this bird, and to be honest, like, we weren't that impressed. We thought it looked pretty.
There are no videos of it lecking. I tried to find. Okay. So there's a bunch of videos of it sitting in a tree. There are some really interesting sounds that it makes that you can hear on these videos, but I could not find the lecking behavior of this bird. It goes to what John was saying. They're just not that well studied.
I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, I was surprised because I was searching on things through my phone, and this thing about long-wattled umbrella bird came up, which is another one of these big crow-like cotingas from Colombia. And this guy had spent something like 20 years trying to get good video of birds, good photos of birds displaying, and he finally did it. And so, a lot of these are not very well studied.
Huh.
Is it because the terrain is so hard to access, or what is the reason that they're not very well studied?
Combination of things. They're yes, and a lot of these species spend a lot of times high in the canopies, and some of the canopies in these tropical forests can be really high, which is a neat point, because cock of the rocks are unusual among the Cotingidae in that they spend a lot of time on the ground, and actually the leks are actually on the grounds in cock of the rocks. So they've been studied really well because you can get to them and set up blinds and actually watch.
Oh, cool.
I mean, you have to carry equipment a long ways, right, to get to some of these places. You're hauling. It's smaller than it was historically, of course, and your phone can do a pretty decent job. But it's really, really, really hard, which is why even in Birds of Paradise, we didn't know very much until people had high-speed video cameras and sat in the trees to watch them. So if females are above males in these places, I don't know if this is what happens, but if the female is above the male, the only way you're going to know what's going on and what the point of either what it looks like or what it's doing is to be in the tree and see down.
Okay.
So if that's the way
Be hard
these
to be
birds
above
go, you're going to have to climb a tree and sit there. I don't even know for how long. I don't know I don't know what their daily habits are like. These are called time budgets when people study birds, what amount of time it spends in one place doing one thing versus another place doing another thing. Feeding, preening, sleeping, that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I don't know anything about that. And I couldn't find anything written.
I would be willing to bet that 60 to 70% of the cotingas of those 65 species have never really had anybody do a really good study where they watch, for instance, the mating rituals and mate choice and stuff go on. The ones that are tractable, sure, but a lot of the other ones, even a bird like screaming piha is one of the most ubiquitous birds in the Amazon basin. They call in these exploded leks, and in this case they're kind of dull brown, and so the males and females look alike, and so I don't think anybody's really had a good opportunity to have watch where males are actually calling and then see females come in and then figure out what females are actually doing. And then after that, if mating is when mating happens, in most of them, the females go off and are basically raising the young on their own. And so they try to be as indiscreet as possible. And so relatively little is known about the nesting biology of those birds either.
It's like they disappear. With this bird, we were wondering, the feathers that are right here, the red feathers, do those up close, did those look extraordinary? Because that was the thing. Actually. I didn't think they looked...
Yeah.
Like I was wondering, like it looked like the color of like a cardinal or something. But
no.
No.
Not up close. They have a unique shape that you could magnify a picture enough to see it, but they have a unique shape, whereas the carotenoids are in the feathers, just like lots of reds, but there's a lot of different kinds of carotenoids in cotingas. Tons and tons of variations of particular kinds of carotenoids, which is interesting. And that was studied by Rick Prum, the guy who was mentioned in The Feather Thief, professor at Yale. But they're flattened, and then the very ends of them are kind of brush-like, the very ends of the feathers. So, and they're shiny and iridescent-y, but not iridescent the way... not like hummingbirds or anything like that, but they do have a slight sheen, probably dictated by the fact that they're flattened.
But Amanda, why anybody decided that was perfect for some key elements of some Victorian fish fly is still beyond me.
Oh,
okay.
I think
so. You're hitting it on the head for me. I was like, what is the big deal?
I think that it was described in 1782, and I think that was right around the time when the haberdashery, all of these fashion things were just coming afterwards. So the people are moving all over the world. That bird was clearly brought back to Europe to be described, and people saw it for the first time. And that doesn't mean they'd seen a lot of birds with feathers like that, right? So this thing was probably pretty exciting and different to the people who were seeing them, the elite people who could get them. You couldn't get access to them unless you were elite. We learned that from The Feather Thief pretty dramatically. So I think it was just like a right circumstances all happening at the same time to produce that bird being so dramatic. But if you look at the feathers, you can see the feathers. I hate to do this, but if you look at the feathers that are in these fly ties, you can see how they've integrated the red-ruffed fruitcrow's red feathers into the ties, and it's spectacular. People should put their artistic talents to better use, I suppose, but they're really amazing. And I'm not sure there's other bird feathers that could do that. I mean, there are others you can color to be red, but the shape and the way they're molded is really spectacular. But don't pay with people.
Well, I mean, I'm just
immoral and illegal.
It also boggles my mind at what was going on in that period of time, as you were talking about, with respect to not just scientific collectors. So Wallace, for instance, some of those birds were collected by Alfred Russel Wallace, and yet his birds were sitting in the British Museum collections up until the time they were stolen, whereas clearly the Victorian fly tyers had access to other ones that were being sent back to Europe by collectors from getting into places all over South America.
So for our collections, this is one of the, I mean, it's on the earlier side of birds. So the earliest one we have of the 22 is from 1893 or 1898. Oh, wow. So that, they're old. But then one of John's students has put tissues into the collection, Aaron Savitt, and that was in 2010-ish. So, we have some from over 100 years apart, but it's just, I should have looked worldwide to see how many were in collections. But
yeah, my guess is it's going to be in the it's going to be on the very low end of most bird species across all avian diversity.
So that became such an important
and I guess
bird.
that may be that may be another reason why they were so coveted by the fish fly tyers.
Yeah, because there weren't very many out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
does anyone?
Go ahead, RJ.
Oh, This might be off topic. So if you wanted to say something else, Shannon, keep going.
No, it's okay.
I was just gonna say, a lot of the fly tyers in the book, it sounded like calls it an Indian crow, and I was just wondering why did people call it an Indian crow? If there's
I kind of
originate.
Sometimes on something like that, I try not to think too much about it.
Okay.
But it wouldn't. No. Actually, I've been reading a biography of Alfred Russel Wallace, and my guess is that the way people got them was by going out with indigenous people in the distribution who were using things like blowguns and stuff to actually get them. So they knew how to actually collect them.
Okay.
That's my guess.
Yeah.
Although some of those things can be as crazy as somebody actually mistaking the origin of the specimen as actually being from India back in the late 1700s. So yeah.
Okay.
I haven't looked into it, but
yeah,
it's a weird it's definitely a weird common name.
Yeah. It was funny not knowing anything about it when I was reading The Feather Thief. I Googled it expecting it to be from India or something, and then all the distributions in South America, I was like, something doesn't add up here.
What's going on? Yeah.
Every once in a while in taxonomy you run into these things like there's a tanager from Peru, from Brazil. It's an endemic to the Atlantic forests of Brazil, but its taxonomic name is Tangera peruviana. And it's literally just the people who described it didn't really know where it was actually from.
So that the red collar thing is called a ruff, imitating Elizabethan, Jacobean, these fancy, stiff collars that people used to wear, indicative of elite status. The bigger and stiffer it is, I guess, the better it is. So that's where the name kind of comes from. And Fruitcrow is all one word, which is also a little bit weird because lots of times if you had Fruitcrow, it would be two words. But in this case, Fruitcrow is one word. Obviously, it's like, oops, it's not really a crow. Well, it eats fruit, so we'll call it a fruit crow.
But did you guys listen to the vocalizations that they make?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna try to play it, see if I can get this to come through. It's such a weird, deep noise. Mm-hmm. I hope it plays through on the microphone, but let me try real quick. Is that coming through?
That's coming through very well, and it's across birds there are things like ruffed grouse, and there are these birds called curassows in South America where I've never heard red-ruffed fruitcrow, but like with some of those other birds, even though you know what they sound like, they're so unexpected that it can be calling for a while before you suddenly go, hey, wait a minute. Like, like I could easily imagine calling that background noise and not even noticing it.
Yeah, you wouldn't, if you hadn't known that birds can make sounds like that, I don't know that you would have thought it was from a bird, that would be your initial thinking. It's certainly something, horror movies could have. It signifies some kind of suspense, I think.
Yeah.
When I hear it.
So there's another aspect of natural history that makes you wonder about it's really a low frequency sound. So is there aspects of hearing in red-ruffed fruitcrows that allow them to pick that up better than other birds, such that they find each other in these montane habitats?
Certainly sounds move through the environment differently based on their the pitch that they have. So
John, you mentioned the ruffed grouse. Does the ruff that each of them have, because it's like the same idea, I guess, like, does that have anything to do with the vocalization?
That's an awesome question, because I guess the quick answer is yes, and yet at the same time I think there are plenty of things that don't have ruffs. I mean, well, just because I think from a visual standpoint sometimes, that I think movement of those feathers on the throat are coordinated with the sound in ways that may be useful for the display of the bird or something.
But
cool.
That bird is it calling while it's displaying? Maybe we don't know enough to know that. But I guess the displays have been described. It does use those feathers in its displays, and it kind of bows down. Apparently it bows down, and then kind of sits more upright, and then kind of opens the feathers up on it. This is not something I've ever seen in real life. So, and actually not that many people have even seen them dead, because there are not that many in museums.
Wow.
But there are a lot more individuals that have been tied into flies probably than are in collections and museums.
That's crazy. Jeez.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're kind of getting close on time. Is there anything else on the red-ruffed fruitcrow we want to get into?
Oh, the words, what they mean, which I also like.
Oh.
The genus name is Pyroderis, and it's Greek. Pyro means fire, and deris means skin or hide, which is interesting.
Oh, cool.
And then the scutatus is its last name, its scientific name, and it's Latin, and it means shielded or armed with a shield. So scutum means shield. Cool. So that's where the name comes from.
Cool. When we were looking at it, I thought a little bit its ruff, I guess, reminded me like a little bit of a hummingbird. I know you said the feather structure is different and the iridescence is different, but I always thought hummingbirds look like armor, kind of, or like a shield. So I don't know. I get
agree.
That. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing two weird things. One of which is why I like doing this podcast, because it always makes me do weird things. One of them is that I started looking at what the properties of those feathers had for fly tying people. So why is it so heavily desirable and sought after? And it said it sets and keeps its color well and wears well compared to other feathers. So that kind of makes sense, right? That I don't, what are the data associated with that? They probably have it, not us, because we don't do those things with the feathers. And then the other thing is it made me go down another rabbit hole about rictal bristles. There's a lot of the descriptions of this bird talk about the little spiky feathers that are around the mouth, and then I had to learn what rictal meant, and so that has to do with the wide gape of a bird's beak. And then I realized something I didn't know. There's a guy named Roger Lederer do you know this story, John? And he has a really interesting site on birds, kind of like an ornithology site that you would use if you were teaching about birds. It's really good. But in 1972, he was one of the first people to take what was then high-speed cameras into the, into the behavioral world to look at the behavior of these birds, because a lot of people at that time thought that maybe these rictal bristles helped with feeding, like they actually could bring the food into the mouth, but they don't do that. And he did high-speed videography of flycatchers that he'd put in a cage and then put some insects, and he trained the flycatchers to go after the insects while he was filming. And then he analyzed the film to kind of see how these bristles were being used in feeding, and it wasn't to assist with feeding. So I found that was my fun thing. Can you imagine what it was like?
So what was it?
Published it in the Wilson Bulletin in 1972.
So what were the bristles?
So they're sensory, so they might be able to feel certain aspects of the environment. And they also prevent the bird from getting kicked in the face, depending on what it is it's eating. And so he favors those things. He saw no evidence in the flycatchers, at least, which have a lot of flycatchers have rictal bristles. And so he saw no evidence that they were involved in any fashion in putting the food into the beak of a bird.
Yeah, so are those bristles just on the corner of their mouths, or
they
like
tend
on
to
either
be.
side?
Some though have them more distributed.
Okay.
All around.
But it's an important point in the sense that we call them fruit crows and we talk about them as being fruit eaters, and they definitely eat a lot of fruit, but these guys are probably also getting a lot of protein from insects too.
Okay.
And then I had to look up rictus because it's a weird word to me. And it not only means the wide opening of a mouth, but it also has like the connotations of a grimace or a forced smile, which I think a lot of birds actually have. You could describe that of quite a few birds having that. Anyways.
That's funny.
That's cool.
Well, we do have a mailbag question today. Should we get into that?
Sure, ask away. Let's hear it.
So this is from Julie Dunlap. Julie says, "Hi, I love your podcast and appreciate especially the insights from Shannon and John based on research conducted on museum birds. Would you please consider doing a show on preventing window collisions, ideally with insights from the Field Museum from birds killed by collisions? Your audience would benefit from learning about the new McCormick Place window treatments and how they can reduce this important source of bird mortality at their own homes and offices, if they do it correctly, not with random hawk stickers like many birders still believe. I'm a volunteer with a group called Safe Skies Maryland that focuses on the issue of bird window collision prevention and has advocated successfully for country-level and state-level bills requiring government buildings to incorporate bird-friendly design in new construction. Thanks for considering this possibility. I look forward to every show. Julie."
Well, I want Julie to come on the podcast where we talk about that in more detail, actually, because she has legislative experience to do that. We have touched on it a few times in some of the episodes in more detail on one of them. Do you guys remember which one where we touched on that?
Last May. It was like right after.
I think we did a full episode when there was the collision at the McCormick where there was almost 1,000 birds. I think we did a full, just kind of like mini episode on that. Yeah. So I believe it might have been in that one.
Yeah, but there's a lot more we could talk about. And again, I'll reiterate: it takes a village to protect birds from smashing into windows. One individual can't do it, and it takes political movement because you have to round up a whole bunch of disparate kinds of people who don't usually talk to each other.
And I just say that you need to gather data to determine the effectiveness of what you've done. So those hawk decals, from my perspective, were actually a logical thing to try to do. And I think the general consensus is they don't work as well as some of these other treatments. But again, this is a field where getting the data is not trivial. And it's one of the reasons why what Dave Willard has accomplished over the years in the sense of continuing to monitor at McCormick Place and looking at whether the lights are on and the curtains are open. And now, just over the last year, because they put up these new window treatments, actually looking at the effects of the window treatments. And it's a dramatic, very dramatic improvement on mortality at McCormick Place, which is a great story. So we should definitely talk about it.
Good for Julie.
Yeah.
See, she took something that mattered to her and she put it into the world and made it happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can sit back and wish for things all you want. We all do that, but you have to wish with action. So I don't care what you pick. Well, maybe I care what you pick, but find something that matters a lot to you. There's even just one little thing, and try to make it happen. Mm-hmm. Even if that's something silly, like saying hello to someone or looking them in the face, or silly small things that can mean a lot. So I have this pink coat that John thinks looks like a house coat, but it's soft and fuzzy.
Did we see it? Did we see it on? Okay. On Wednesday we saw it.
She didn't wear it on stage.
I didn't, but I thought about it because it's like a security blanket. But so many people have actually directly come up to me, touched the coat because it looks so soft and fuzzy, and said they loved it and asked me where I got it and told me they thought it was awesome that I wore it, which makes me think maybe it really does look like a house coat, and people are shocked. But I actually think the fact that it's bright pink, it just makes people feel happy, and it makes them feel good enough that they actually come up to me and say something. And I don't think I'm like the most open-looking person in the world, especially because I can't hear. So whatever.
What are you going to do when somebody comes up to you and says, "What kind of mammal did that come from?"
It's Muppet.
Yeah.
Naked mole rat.
Yeah, there we go. Genetically engineered naked mole rats.
There were no mammals sacrificed in the creation of my fuzzy pink coat. Anyways, wear something that makes you happy because it probably makes other people happy too.
All right. Julie, please, we'd love to have you on too. So that'd be awesome to have you come on and talk more about this.
For sure.
All right. Does anyone want to wrap it up on this one?
Well, I think we can say that people need to go out and study red-ruffed fruitcrows because there's a lot we need to know.
It would be an awesome Halloween costume for people who are looking for ideas of things they can do. If you want to get attention at your Halloween party, you'll go as a red-ruffed Fruitcrow, as long as you're not going to a party with ornithologists who they'll all know who you are. But
or with fly fishermen, fly tires.
You better be careful if that's where you're going. Yeah. They'll tackle you to the ground and pull off your feathers. The funny thing is those feathers grow back, right? So it's not like they're not a finite resource in that sense. They are when they come off of an individual that's dead in a collection. It's finite, but they're not finite in real life. The birds molt them and regrow them. So anyways, there are ways to sustainably use things that aren't that destructive.
I'm not in favor of raising a bunch of red-ruffed fruitcrows in captivity, though.
There's no way they can be raised in captivity. If that could be done, that community would have done it. Come on, John.
There are cocks of the rocks at the Brookfield Zoo.
Yeah, but
true.
Fair. But if that particular bird could be raised in captivity, it totally would be because of the pressures from that community historically. I'm
actually fascinated, for instance, that why isn't cock of the rock one of the feathers that people have coveted?
It's a nice color, but they're not the same.
What I'm wondering is whether there's actually some property, coming back to what you said about changing over time. Mm-hmm. So it may be that the carotenoids in a cock of the rock are actually ones that break down, where for some reason there's something interesting and unique about the carotenoids in red-ruffed fruitcrows.